Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So it's just after 24 hours since Sundered Doctrine released. It was released yesterday, and whilst I wasn't able to tune in for the entire dungeon race, I did catch the end of it. I was also there at the very beginning. Thank you very much again to Evan and CB Gray, and for Bungie for inviting me on, even for my short little slot to talk about lore. I also went ahead and got my first clear on normal mode with Dux and Joe, and I have to say that my first impressions of it, yeah, they're pretty good. But there's a single blemish, which I think I'll get into right about now. I mean, it's incredibly relevant, because honestly, it's the reason why I'm not doing one massive video and I'm breaking it up into a few smaller ones. The quest that comes along with the dungeon is time-gated. That doesn't feel great on a dungeon story quest. We don't know how long it's time-gated for. Most of the time this stuff is time-gated for about a week, but we just don't know because it doesn't say. I can't help but feel like Bungie wants to give us more to do over time in Sundered Doctrine and give us more reasons to return, but breaking up the quest like this really doesn't feel fantastic. I think I prefer this to Warlord's Ruins approach of do the dungeon a dozen times to chase the boss Screebs between encounters, but not by much. Vesper's Host had a very long quest chain at the very start, and it required us to do some puzzle solving, which went way above and beyond, and well, I don't think most people were expecting it. It was kind of a pleasant surprise for some, but also, that was really cool, but it makes me wonder how many people did the quest, because making changes like this, it's often something that's driven by data at Bungie. So, yeah, I wonder how many people actually went and did the Vesper's Host secret quest. A quest like this gives you a direct means of interacting with the content, and it lets you know that there's all sorts of stuff that's still there to be done. But being unable to finish said quest within a reasonable amount of time just doesn't feel great, and leaving it sitting on your inventory at step 5, yeah, that just kind of feels really bad. The sad thing is that's probably also one of these moments that we'll see repeated again. I imagine that we'll have to wait one more time when we get to step 8 or 9 just to complete it. I can't help but feel like there's a better way to do this, I just don't know exactly what that is. Either way, I've talked for far too long about a technical thing that is perhaps the only hitch in the dungeon, because for the rest of the dungeon itself, I think the experience is excellent. It was a harder contest day 1 experience than a lot of raids, and took longer for a first clear than a lot of raids. Frankly, it shows too. The dungeon at certain bits and pieces of it is brutal. I think poor Milo, aka Mr. Raffle Waffles, is still trying to finish his first clear, and as of me recording this, he's still on Encounter 2. Good luck and Godspeed to you, Milo. I hope you do finish it.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
As for everything else, I mean, sleep when you're done, please. Sundered Doctrine is also our first Dread dungeon, and it poses a lot of tantalizing questions about what's happening with the Dread right now. It's also the first point at which we can see the Dread working with what I think is an unaligned Dark Hive faction. Perhaps they're a part of Xivu Arath's brood that simply abandoned her. Remember that Xivu Arath was banished from her throne world and effectively was rendered mortal, and ever since then, she's been on the back foot and she's been much weaker for it. The dungeon itself has us delving into one of the unexplored parts of Destiny's greatest destination. Okay, maybe not its greatest, but one of its greatest for certain. Rhulk's Pyramid. And the place is ominous as ever, but this time, it's not a grand repository of history and knowledge that we see lording over the rest of the ship from above. No, now we're down in the grime and the grit and the guts of the pyramid ship, and we're exploring Rhulk's laboratory and storage facility for his experiments. And what might those experiments be, you ask? Worms. Hundreds, possibly thousands of worms. If we know one thing about Rhulk, it's that these experiments he's conducted with the worms are not exactly hidden. They're on prominent display, and it's also clear that they are the offspring of Zeta, the mother worm, mother of the worm gods, and presumably the progenitor of every worm ever consumed by the Hive. She is the source of the unending blood tithe that the Hive still pay to the darkness and the witness. We also know that the worms are a source of power that Rhulk was attempting to integrate into other species, namely the Scorn. We know this thanks to Vow of the Disciple, where we faced down one of the successful experiments, or perhaps more successful experiments. You may remember him, or it, as the second encounter or the first boss, the Caretaker. Especially towards the end of the dungeon, you start to see more and more of these dead worms strewn about the laboratory complex. The displays and states of some of these creatures in death are honestly quite sad. I don't really feel as much sympathy for the worms generally. I mean, the worm larvae that get fed to the hive enforce their blood tithe, and basically push them towards violence at all times. The worm gods, on the other hand, have done this on a bigger scale, and have pushed the hive towards what is essentially genocide, for generation after generation ad infinitum almost. But these fully developed worms that are here dead in the pyramid? I mean, if they're just experiments, they're kind of blameless as best we know. Being Rolk's experiments may well have been their only purpose in life, which means effectively, they might have just been born to die. In a way, perhaps it's the only time I've felt pity for any of the worm species. And no, I don't count Asa because she's a proto-worm god. Also, I mean, it's Asa. She scares the bejesus out of me. In many ways, these worms are completely blameless and they feel like the real victims of this dungeon and of, well, what's left of Rolk's lab. Either way, they're not the ones you'll be fighting, as the Hive and the Dread that are here will take up the bulk of your concern and firepower. Most concerning of all, though, is that they're clearly looking for something. The earliest thing I can say about this is that for some reason they were drawn to the pyramid ship. This is a point that's explained in the lore in more detail, but to go into it really briefly, it appears that the Dread are broken without a leader. They have been searching for a power that has called out to them from deep within the vault that Rolk secured at the heart of the pyramid. Whatever the first disciple held within the vault must be of dire importance to him, and subsequently to the Dread. Whether they intend to follow that power, or to use it to remake themselves, appears to be something changeable on a case-by-case basis. And this leads us to our next point. It appears that the Dread have been imbued with more of a spark of independence and character than we might have initially realized. We'll be learning about this a lot more as we talk about the individual Dread characters, but it does appear that Sundered Doctrine contains a lot of foundational lore on the Dread themselves, thanks to the fact that the armor from this dungeon has lore tabs discussing all of this. Not to mention, the lore that we learn about is, I mean, it's just really cool stuff. We learn about the Subjugator, who is at the center of the story in Heresy. We learn about the Subjugators from the Dual Destiny exotic mission. We learn about the moment when the Witness created the first of the Dread, from the light of the Traveler and the power of its own darkness. And we learn about when the Witness entered the Traveler and first made it scream. What's even cooler is that the armor appears to be the direct source for all of this, as within the protective shell of each of the armor pieces, memories of the Dread have been preserved for us to experience firsthand, which is kind of awesome in its own way. It feels like the very resonant material from which these are constructed. The fact that you're basically throwing on the armor of the Dread sort of imbues you with those memories. It's very much in tune with what their theme is, which is the manifestation of memory through light and darkness. Of course, we also can't not talk about the presence of Savathun and the Hidden in this dungeon. The Hidden are a fairly silent part to the narrative at the moment, but they're clustered near the entrance to the dungeon, and they're investigating the place, but in particular, they're investigating a piece of apparatus that's similar to what's being used throughout the dungeon, a sort of wheel of concentric circles. You also have a bunch of inputs on the device, which use the symbols from Vow of the Disciple. Surprise, surprise, they're back. Was this really a surprise to anyone? I don't think it was. In the process of moving this device, and in the process of completing the dungeon, we also hear from Savathun herself, who at first chides Rolk for keeping her out of the dungeon and out of his pyramid ship. I have to say, there's a lot more to it. As time goes on, I'm sure we'll see even more of the quest, but there's a really cool interaction just to see Savathun basically still always spying on us in her throne world. We know that she is not necessarily immediately active in this dungeon, but as part of the story of the quest, we definitely invite her in. And that's kind of cool. I won't say more on that. that's something I want to cover later as time goes on. Another fascinating notion we get from all of this is that there's really a fourth major character alongside the final boss, Savathun, and us, and that is namely the pyramid ship itself, or what is left of it. The pyramid is continually being given commands by us in the dungeon, and in some instances it is willing to accept them. This actually goes to further demonstrate a point that's being made in the lore, and has been made since the final shape, which is that without the witness to control them, the pyramid ships are all yearning for a master. In a sense, they're no different from the Taken, the Dread, and maybe even the Hive and the Scorn. They're all looking for a strong leader to call them back into action and subservience. The pyramid ships have always sort of responded to our presence and moved as we needed them to, but before it seemed like there was a purpose where it was being driven by another. In some instances, like say the European pyramid, it seemed as though it was the dissenters trying to allow us access and ingress so that we could gain necessary darkness powers. Whereas in the case of Rolk's pyramid, it felt like Rolk was directly inviting us inside as a challenge to us, allowing us to navigate through the pyramid at his own discretion. Now, with the ability to input codes, it appears that we're able to exert a limited amount of control over the vessel in the absence of the witness and its first disciple. I imagine this is partially done through the power of our own will, but also through the mechanical systems within the pyramid and the energy that we redirect. Energy that maybe is originating from the corpses of the worm gods. I'll have more on that in a later video because honestly the source of the energy is just not clear at all. It does appear to be resonance, but I don't know, it burns you on the way through. This might just be energy for the sake of video game. Either way, this leads us to some fascinating implications because ultimately, again, the pyramid has no master, and if we're able to use the equipment within the pyramid and command it, even if it is just through its rudimentary apparatus, then hell, maybe we could take further control of the pyramid. And if we needed to, we might be able to raise it from the Disciples' Bog after all, kind of like Luke Skywalker's X-Wing, except massive and much more angular. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but who knows? There is the environmental storytelling that allows us to potentially see that happen. And also, talking about environmental storytelling generally, it's excellent as always, and I had a really high bar when it came to the actual environmental storytelling that I expected from this dungeon. And you know what? It doesn't quite surpass it, but it definitely meets it. The bar is really high because of Vow of the Disciple. It is, I think, one of the best examples of Destiny's environmental storytelling, and it's purely because Rolk puts everything out on display for you. And here, I think it does something rather similar to it. This is not Rolk's grand temple complex. It is something that has no longer got a function now that Rolk is dead. It's a place that is starting to fill up with the swampy water of the bog above it, as the temple complexes at the base of the pyramid are starting to basically get overrun. Even moss has started to grow here where before it would have been nothing but obsidian black pyramid stone. It's starting really to fall further into the mud, just like the rest of the ship. Inside, the worms and experiments are probably the highlight though. They are everywhere. Some of them can be seen having died burrowing through the hull of the ship. It's almost like they were trying to escape in their last moments. The rows of pyramid experiments encased in glass are, as ever, present. They're a constant reminder of the evil that has been brewing in this vessel for millennia, and I think it says a lot about Rolk too. Take a look at the way that the worm corpses were discarded. Take a look at the way that everything here has been left. Take a look at the way that these experiments were mass-produced, and it really speaks to who Rolk is. It speaks to his sense of arrogance, his ambition, and even his contempt for the things that he was experimenting on. It's not as good as the ascent to Rolk himself, I feel, but the battle above the Upended is almost never going to be something that gets topped in Destiny. I think it's peak. But this still certainly captures a lot of the old glory that Vow had, and I think also it shows a different, equally dark side to Rolk, where when he was down in the guts of his ship, working on the day-to-day things that required his attention, he was still equally evil and vicious. Above all though, I think there is one question that is more pressing than any other, and that is simply this. What the hell is in the vault that the Dread were trying to crack? It is the most secure vault on the ship. but it was also near Rorke's experiments and labs. So what does that imply? Rorke was also the second most powerful being that we've ever encountered, far surpassing Oryx and perhaps only beaten out by the Witness itself. So what the hell did he need to lock away and protect? Or just perhaps lock away? Is it something that he was trying to keep out of other people's hands? Or did he have to lock it away for his own safety? With that in mind, how did this thing that's been trapped in the vault reach out to the Dread? And what are they trying to do with it universally? Some of them want to claim its power. Others don't want to be claimed by a power and don't want to be subservient to anything. It's a strange moment where it's not entirely clear from everything in this initial 24-hour period what's really going on, but I can tell you for certain I will uncover it and I will unravel the mysteries here. One hiccup with the quest aside, the good stuff here is still really good. Sundered Doctrine and its predecessor in the form of Vesper's Host both hold a really high torch for dungeons going forward, and yes, they are much harder, but I also think that they are serious pieces of endgame content that provide a potential basis and blueprint for how Bungie could do storytelling in this going forward. I am still a little disappointed that we don't get more lore tabs, but that's a general game-wide thing, and frankly, this storytelling that they have going on in the dungeons now, I think is starting to really hit its stride. It was okay when it came to Warlord's Ruin, and I think they've done a decent job previously in outings such as Duality, but I think this really does hit the nail on the head. I think this takes the cake. Don't know if it's what I'd call the best dungeon so far, but that's purely because Vesper's Host exists, and, well, I still have questions about that strange portal in the sky. Either way, it's definitely up there. And if you want to play it for yourself, it's live now. Normal mode is now live, and contest will be there for another 24 hours or so. Well, at least from the moment at which I'm recording this. If you're listening to this later, who knows how much time is left, it's probably gone. Either way, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. I will have more videos on Sundered Doctrine out as soon as I can. But in the meantime, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that my name is Byf. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.